Urgent! Lukashenko in tears fell to his knees before Zelensky. Batka is ready to betray Putin. The Ukrainian armed forces will be welcomed in Minsk. Putin is in shock. Moscow is lying low, waiting for the blow. The secret trap for the dictatorship has already snapped shut. At this very moment, everything has turned upside down at the front. A major win for Ukrainian forces, shocking world leaders. The Kremlin's trap has snapped shut. Putin's generals went dark in the eyes after this. Zaporizhzhia has buried the Russian army. The countdown is now in hours. Everything is already prepared for Putin's destruction. The secret conspiracy of the special services has reached the home stretch. All of this and more in our upcoming segment. Hotspot! Shock! Lukashenko changed his tune on the fly. Batka is tearfully begging Zelensky. Minsk is betraying Putin live on air. What happened has horrified the patriots. Lukashenko has launched an unpredictable game of wild contrasts, which forced the FSB to urgently bring their special forces to full combat readiness. See the details. The sly fox Lukashenko has expressed his willingness to personally meet with Volodymyr Zelensky and, according to Batka himself, at any location in Ukraine or Belarus.
Please, we are open to this. At any location in Ukraine or Belarus, I am ready to meet with him and discuss the issues of Belarusian-Ukrainian relations and perhaps talk about prospects.
Now, in fact, without even thinking it over, probably, or knowing that nothing of the sort will happen, he has expressed his willingness to almost come to Ukraine and meet there.
Lukashenko also swears that Belarus does not intend to enter into conflict with Ukraine and is ready to discuss this. But he immediately adds that Minsk could still potentially be drawn into military actions.
We absolutely do not threaten anyone, but we have such weapons and we are fully prepared to defend our homeland in every way, from Brest to Vladivostok, our shared homeland. And we will do this by all means.
We know the pressure points and where his friends are, where he lives. We also know all his oil refineries and airstrips, so I think he shouldn't overplay his hand too much there.
Thus, political analysts agree that Lukashenko is trying to demonstrate his importance as a peacemaker president, first and foremost to Putin, the West, the US, and the Belarusian people.
It seems to me that external appearances are important to Lukashenko as well. He needs to show the world that he still exists, that he has access to nuclear weapons, that he is an important person. Because in the West, especially in Europe, he is perceived primarily as a Russian puppet, as an incapable person who does not make decisions or determine policy. So here, Lukashenko needs to show off a bit.
But no one in the West was willing to talk to the Belarusian dictator, and diplomats certainly did not consider a meeting with the Ukrainian president.
Initially, I believed that the rapprochement with Lukashenko was a matter related to Ukraine. He was expected to be used as a possible mediator or as a source of information, as a communication channel with Moscow. Luka will flirt with Trump, flirt with Xi Jinping, and with Putin. Well, it's a dangerous game. Very often, those who try to sit on such a split end up being torn to pieces.
Vladimir Zelensky also did not fall for Lukashenko's negotiations, talks, or meetings. The Ukrainian president made it quite clear to Minsk that it shouldn't play games with Kyiv, threaten with an attack, and then go on to talk about peace.
We have the capability to act preemptively against Russian territories. A threat could come from there. And as for the leadership of Belarus, they need to stay alert. In other words, they should understand that there will be consequences if there are aggressive actions against Ukraine, against our people.
And such action shouldn't be ruled out, especially in light of the nuclear drills that were recently conducted on Belarusian territory. At that time, Lukashenko and Putin connected via video call to jointly observe the exercises. According to analysts, this is how Alexander Grigorievich tries to prove to the Russian president his involvement in his activities and once again to intimidate the Baltic countries. Russia's road of death, the Russian front collapsed, fiery hell to the borders, Ukraine skillfully reclaimed the land. Our drones struck a match right in the heart of the Russian army. Russia has officially declared the end. Could it be that the countdown to the Kremlin dictatorship has already begun right now? See the details. The turning point on the front in Ukraine is the main topic in most Western publications today. As Bloomberg reports, over the past couple of months, more than 400 square kilometers of territory have returned to Ukrainian control. This is partly due to the occupiers losing access to Starlink satellite communications, which has impacted both the enemy's communications and their ability to use drones. Meanwhile, Ukraine is only increasing its drone strikes.
Drones have become a terror with wings in the night, in part thanks to this machine vision, which not only provides guidance in the final stage, but also, as you can see, actually searches for the very targets that need to be hit thanks to AI functionality. In other words, this significantly eases the task for the Ukrainian operator.
Where just yesterday personnel, weapons and fuel for the occupiers were openly transported, today these are roads of death, as Russian truck drivers never tire of recording videos about it.
I've never seen such tension along the highway. Burned out civilian cars stand on the roadsides after drone strikes. And the most terrifying thing is that just a few hours before we arrived, a strike hit right at the unloading spot. Guys, if you're driving, Mangush, Melitopol, Donetsk, Mariupol, don't travel at night, don't sleep on the roadsides, especially if you're carrying dangerous cargo. Right now, stopping for an hour to sleep could cost you dearly. And the lack of timely deliveries directly affects the front line. So, the day before, the defense forces launched another small counteroffensive in Zaporizhzhia and cleared Stepnohirsk. Today, enemy firing positions are being targeted outside the city limits. The Ukrainian defense forces have moved on to the next steps to reduce the number of Russians who have dispersed throughout the area, and active efforts are now underway to completely eliminate them and stabilize the sector. Unfortunately, Russian forces still have reserves to continually send their infantry into assault operations, but it has become much more difficult for them to carry out their plans. No reinforcements have been observed recently. However, even without reinforcements, the Russians are trying to move forward. The commander's utter brutality leaves their subordinates with virtually no chance of survival. Just two numbers. Let's compare 2 months, March and April. In April, the intensity of combat operations increased by about 3%, while the enemy's territorial gains decreased by 11%. Essentially, this indicates that the enemy is intensifying its strategic efforts on the battlefield, suffering significantly greater losses, but only capturing a far smaller amount of Ukrainian territory. And I think it's obvious that this trend will continue. According to American intelligence, the counteroffensive operation by the Ukrainian armed forces in the Zaporizhzhia direction became Ukraine's first territorial success since 2023. And Reuters, citing its own sources, writes that Ukraine is currently slowing down the enemy's advance in all directions. The factor of those very fortifications, which we've heard many complaints about, but nevertheless, this option works and significantly slows down the enemy's advance. And accordingly, the factor of drones. Those very kill zones have a tremendous impact on all the enemy's attempts to expand their territorial gains. The shutdown of Starlink also helped, especially right on the front line. Russia lost the ability to use FPV drones as effectively. Meanwhile, Ukraine, on the contrary, has increased its potential. As a result, the defense forces were even able to expand the 20-kilometer kill zone along the line of contact. Now General Syrski is talking about a 30-kilometer zone, which accordingly creates even more problems for the Russians. At the same time, the Ukrainian armed forces began systematically depleting resources up to a depth of 160 kilometers. Enemy radars, short and medium-range air defense systems, communications, logistics hubs, and major military targets, all of these are burning by the dozens every day, and the pace of Russia's advance has dropped to its lowest in the past 2.5 years.
The Russian front has collapsed. They were killed all the way to the very borders. We swiftly reclaimed the land. Our drones struck a match of vengeance right at the heart of the Russian army. Slutsky has officially announced the finale. Could it be that the countdown to the Kremlin dictatorship's end has already begun right now? See the details?
Details in the report. While Russians are being told about a strong leader, the Kremlin chief himself is hiding ever deeper behind security, bunkers, and even body doubles. We know how it will all end, but we won't make any public statements about it. Putin, or rather the bunker dweller, has almost disappeared from Russia. His new record is 196 days. This is a pause in his trips around the regions, and he hasn't had such a break even during COVID. The situation in the country is getting worse and worse. Vladimir Putin is now even more deeply fearful for his own personal safety. And his trust in everyone around him is disintegrating rapidly like a fragile soap bubble. And now, with the constant threat of Ukrainian drones flying overhead and high-stakes meetings with Trump, his intense conspiratorial mindset is completely dominating his entire psychological state. Putin's first trip outside the Moscow region since January only happened in April. At that time, amid talk of falling approval ratings, he suddenly went to St. Petersburg and visited a sports school, apparently hoping that this would help him regain the people's affection. Have you been doing gymnastics for 7 years?
Yes.
How old are you?
10.
Good luck. Good luck to you, girls.
Thank you.
Best wishes. Goodbye. From time to time, he needs to be shown that he still sometimes resembles a human being and not just there, a figurine from a computer or from a TV as one may think. That's why he needs to pretend to be something humanoid. Yes, and that's why these outings happen from time to time. But the most telling thing is, even during the pandemic, Putin didn't stay in isolation for this long. Back then, the longest pause without trips was 132 days. And in the years before the pandemic and the full-scale invasion, the dictator could go up to 45 days without any trips. And all of this is starting to look less like caution and more like genuine fear. Of course, some negotiations could be taking place behind the dictator's back. And in fact, even from such basic knowledge of history, one should understand that guarantees
and that everything is fine for Putin in this regard. There are no such guarantees at all. On the contrary, with a high degree of probability, some conspiracies could very well be brewing behind his back.
Against the backdrop of drone attacks on Russia, the Kremlin has clearly started to get nervous. And the closer the war gets to Russia itself, the more cautious the Russian dictator becomes. But what is he more afraid of? Ukrainian strikes or an internal conspiracy?
I think he is more afraid of internal conspiracies than of Shahed drone strikes. After all, even though he does travel quite a bit, that's exactly why, in fact, he actually doesn't go anywhere much at all. He understands, of course, he is more wary of internal conspiracies, which he is certainly trying to protect himself from. But he cannot be completely certain that he is safe.
Arrests of generals, dismissals of officials, and the constant search for traitors within the system itself. This is clearly not just happening for no reason.
This is, well, already a classic scenario. There's just the classic decline of a dictator when he's genuinely afraid that those who swore eternal loyalty to him just yesterday will attack him from every corner.
There was a telling moment even at the parade in Moscow on May 9th.
There were a couple of people from the Security Council, well, sort of formally. Medvedev and Shoigu, yes, Matvienko, Volodin and Shulgin, and maybe some other minor figures, but they didn't really stand out. And none of them was sitting next to Putin. And if you take a close look at that very reception, there was a large dining table set for about 13 people that saw, and there actually weren't any other Russian politicians seated at that table, except for Vladimir Putin himself.
And of course, especially now, how could we do without body doubles? Even though the Kremlin denies their existence, they have always been around.
Vladimir Vladimirovich, hello, I am a student studying at St. Petersburg State University. I want to ask, is it true that you have many body doubles?
He thought about it and decided that only one person should look like him and speak with his voice. And that person will be me.
Online, people are constantly comparing different videos of Putin. His face, facial expressions, walk, even his behavior in public. And for a long time now, people have been talking about at least 3 Putins.
In my opinion, this is primarily a security measure. Why is it a security measure? To begin with, one of the primary reasons for this is so that when Putin is actually traveling somewhere, it remains completely uncertain and unpredictable which specific route he is taking. The only thing these so-called body doubles actually serve to demonstrate to the world is that Putin's deep-seated paranoia has been around for quite a long while. And now it has simply reached an absolute and unprecedented peak.
If you put it all together, the isolation, the fear of traveling, the purges, and the talk about doubles, this is no longer just the image of a closed-off leader. This is a system where the one who kept everyone in fear for years is now starting to fear everything around him. And the main change in the Kremlin today is not politics, but paranoia. Shock. The Ukrainian armed forces are cutting off Crimea. The peninsula is tightly trapped in the deadly vice. It has happened. Drone forces have completely destroyed Russia's dome. Azov has finally launched round-the-clock surveillance of the enemy. Putin's army has zero chance of escape. The Russian army has been left defenseless before the punishing sword of retribution. Details in the report.
The demilitarization of occupied Crimea is proceeding according to plan. Over the past few months, Ukraine's defense forces have delivered hundreds of effective strikes against the positions of Russian occupiers on the peninsula. First, the drone operators took out radar and air defense systems. Then, starting in the spring of 26, they switched to striking airfields, Iskanders, and other missile systems.
It can be stated that what we initially feared has happened. The peninsula's air defense system suffered heavy damage from systematic drone strikes using Starlinks, after which Ukrainian drones began targeting other objectives such as Bastion coastal missile systems and long-range multiple rocket launchers.
But the occupiers' troubles are not limited to the borders of Crimea. Ukrainian drones are conquering new horizons. First, Azov took control of the roads in Mariupol, then the success of the legendary Corps was scaled up to the entire so-called land corridor to Crimea.
The Ukrainian defense forces are using the tactic of striking with Hornet drones, which have a range of up to 200 kilometers along the so-called land corridor. This is the transport logistics that, according to the Russians' plan, was supposed to connect the territory of the Russian Federation with the temporarily occupied territories of the Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson regions, and accordingly with the occupied Crimea. The main purpose of the so-called land corridor is precisely to provide logistics for the occupying army.
Once a rear and safe logistical artery for the occupiers, the Taganrog-Melitopol highway has turned into a graveyard for fuel trucks. Trucks are burning 150 kilometers from the front line, which has forced the occupiers in Crimea and southern Ukraine onto a fuel diet.
Dear residents of Sevastopol, in the evening and morning, I held emergency meetings regarding the fuel supply situation in the city. To avoid panic, as we did last time, we are introducing a measure that has already proven effective. Fuel sales at TS network gas stations will be limited to 20 liters per vehicle or per canister until the situation stabilizes.
When it comes to strikes on Crimea and the rear logistics of the Russian army, Ukrainian soldiers are acting creatively. For example, the previously mentioned Hornet drones are launched from aerostats. The drone travels dozens of kilometers on a balloon, which increases the UAV's strike range by 1.5 to 2 times. In addition, during attacks on the occupiers' positions in Crimea, unmanned systems forces have begun using drones that launch missiles. The difference in pace of development of small airspace assets and especially the practice of their combat use is obvious, but unfortunately not to our Ministry of Defense. The Ukrainian armed forces are systematically destroying Crimean air defenses, airfields, military facilities, and are taking control of logistics. The longer Putin drags things out, the weaker the Russians' positions become on the peninsula, which means there is more to come. Morning in Moscow. Tokayev dealt a harsh blow to Putin. Kazakhstan is officially burying Gazprom and confiscating billions from the Kremlin's coffers for Ukraine. And what a knockout for the Kremlin. This is the final nail in the coffin of the Kremlin's main financial empire. What will happen in the coming hours? Watch. Russia has lost access to assets worth almost $1.5 billion. Frankly speaking, I was a bit taken aback when I heard about this. I know about it. Honestly, it's a bit too much. The reason for all this is a decision by a Kazakh court which allows for the forced collection of money from Gazprom in favor of Ukraine's Naftogaz. The decision didn't come out of nowhere. It's a continuation of the dispute between the Ukrainian and Russian companies that began back in 2022. The dispute between the companies is related to a 2019 contract for organizing gas transit through Ukraine. In May 2022, transit through the Sokhranovka point was hindered due to the actions of Russian occupation forces, after which Naftogaz continued deliveries through Sudzha. Despite this, Gazprom refused to fully pay for the services, which became the basis for arbitration. In September 2022, Naftogaz initiated proceedings in Switzerland under the rules of the International Chamber of Commerce. And already in June 2025, the arbitral tribunal found the Russian company Gazprom liable and ordered it to pay not only the debt, but also interest and expenses. Of course, Russia tried to appeal the decision, but unsuccessfully. Therefore, the Ukrainian company Naftogaz launched an international campaign to recover assets in various countries. As you can imagine, Kazakhstan became the first successful case. The news that Astana is helping Ukraine seize the assets of Russia's main source of income caught the Kremlin off guard. So much so, in fact, that not even the regime's spokespersons have commented on Kazakhstan's decision to this day. Because they are in shock, because, I think that people who are reading the situation again understand that this is a clear signal. Kazakhstan is distancing itself from Russia. Yes, you can't really call Kazakhstan anti-Russian. Communication and cooperation between the countries continues. The president of Kazakhstan flew to Moscow for the parade, then Putin congratulated Tokayev on his birthday, and now a visit by Putin to Kazakhstan is being planned. And of course, all of this is accompanied by talk of strategic partnership.
We have graciously been invited to visit the Republic of Kazakhstan next year for an official state visit, which we are looking forward to.
Thank you. With pleasure. But there is another side to the coin. Let's start with what is most painful for the Kremlin. Kazakhstan is actively seeking oil routes that bypass Russia and finding them. Astana is now betting on Turkey. Erdogan and Turkey, in my opinion, are actually encouraging these former Soviet republics to say, you really shouldn't be so focused on Russia. And this not focusing on Russia has resulted in Kazakhstan deciding to reduce the Kremlin's influence in society as well.
We have a special relationship with Kazakhstan. That's obvious. Everyone understands this very well. We have an allied relationship in the truest sense of the word.
The new constitution of Kazakhstan adopted in 2026 lowers the status of the Russian language. And Astana did this elegantly, simply by changing the wording. Specifically, the sentence stating that Russian is used on an equal footing with the Kazakh language is planned to be replaced with alongside Kazakh. Although these changes are formal in nature, they reflect the Kazakh authorities' policy of reducing Russia's influence on the country's life. Add to this Kazakhstan's decision to prosecute even its own citizens who fought on the side of the Russian Federation against Ukraine. The authorities of Kazakhstan are actively prosecuting participants in the war in Ukraine. In 2025, local law enforcement initiated a record number of more than 700 cases against those who joined Russian military formations. In short, they're targeting the partnership relations from all sides precisely, slowly, but very confidently. Stories like this have happened before. It's nothing new. It's just that now everything has reached a new level because they're hitting at the very foundation of Russia. They're hitting Gazprom. Previously, Kazakhstan refrained from such actions, but now we see that even this red line has already been crossed by Kazakhstan. And while Moscow talks about strategic partnership, Kazakhstan is heading the Intergovernmental Traseka Commission, the organization for the Europe-Caucasus-Asia Transport Corridor Agreement, which is essentially a route bypassing Russia.
So Astana is not just leaving Russian routes behind, it is now taking the controls of alternative routes itself. And here, it's not just about Kazakhstan anymore. After the start of the full-scale war, Russia, which for decades played the role of big brother in the post-Soviet space, has itself revealed the limits of its power.
But now, when we no longer see that power, perhaps it's time, so to speak, to remember everything, to settle old scores. Kazakhstan has quite a few grievances against Russia, and not just Kazakhstan. Many of the former, let's say, republics that were part of the Soviet Union, since Russia has always behaved arrogantly, always played the role of the big brother. And we see how, step by step, the former Soviet republics are allowing themselves to take tough measures against Russia.
The Kremlin, bogged down in war, has lost its aura of invincibility, and countries that used to look cautiously toward Moscow have begun, step by step, to cast off the old shackles of dependence. Kazakhstan is simply one of the most striking examples in this story. Without loud explosions, without anti-Russian slogans, but with decisions that each time leave Moscow a little further from the levers of influence. The Black Sea is taking revenge with a deadly boomerang. Russia has sunk into its own hell. Toxic fuel oil from Tuapse has completely flooded all the beaches of Crimea. What the Kremlin has been feeding its war machine for years is now being washed up by the waves onto the beaches of Sevastopol, Yalta, and Alushta. Watch for the first details. There are only a few days left before the start of the holiday season in the temporarily annexed Crimea. However, instead of news about beach preparations, residents are increasingly reporting fuel oil washing up on the coast.
I'm at Lyubimovka Beach witnessing this sad scene. Yesterday, people were already collecting fuel oil here, and yet there's still a lot left.
The first reports appeared on May 7th. By May 9th, the Telegram channel Crimean Wind had already published photos of pollution on the beaches on the northern side of Sevastopol. According to satellite image monitoring, a trail of oil pollution about 30 kilometers long was detected in the sea.
This is the filth. There are spots, and it's as if there are tiny splashes all around.
In the following days, fuel oil began to be found on the beaches of Fiolent, Greater Yalta, and then on other sections of the coast from Sudak to Sevastopol and even Yevpatoria.
You have to be able to admit your mistakes. Fuel oil has appeared. Here, maybe there isn't as much of it as, say, in Tuapse or Anapa. However, the fact remains.
The Russian environmental monitoring project Transparent World, after analyzing satellite images from May 12th and 13th, reported signs of film pollution on the sea surface along the southern coast of Crimea. According to experts, traces of pollution were observed from Alushta to Sudak and then shifted toward Feodosia and Koktebel. Environmentalists are also reporting the pollution. According to Russian environmentalist Jora Kovanosyan, in Gurzuf, volunteers were involved in cleaning up the fuel oil. Meanwhile, residents of Yalta complained about the lack of a systematic response from the authorities.
I called emergency services and messaged the governor's page. No response. Others reached out before, but no one's planning to clean this up except us. I was upset that nobody cared.
In Sevastopol, officials claim that no mass discharges have been recorded. According to official data, during the May holidays, 12 reports of localized pollution were received and specialized services collected 31 bags of contaminated soil. However, after that, the topic practically disappeared from the official agenda.
Few people see what the beach looks like behind the scenes in the spring. Mountains of microplastics, which are washed ashore by storms from the sea throughout the winter, and fuel oil on the rocks. And this is already the second season since the ship accidents. We collect the plastic waste and fuel oil in bags and burn them. It's problematic to remove all of this.
The authorities in Crimea hardly make any public statements about the pollution of the coastline, despite numerous reports from Yalta, Gurzuf, and Miskor. According to environmentalists, the fuel oil could have reached the shores of Crimea after a petroleum spill near Anapa, which was recorded on April 7th. According to satellite monitoring data, the size of the oil slick increased dozens of times over several weeks, and currents and wind gradually carried the pollution toward Crimea. Experts link the spill to the tanker Sofia, which was in the area of the incident. At the same time, the authorities of Russia's Krasnodar Krai claim that the pollution was caused by Ukrainian drone strikes on civilian vessels. While the causes of the accident continue to be discussed, new discharges of fuel oil are being recorded on the Crimean coast, and according to eyewitnesses, it is often local residents and volunteers themselves who are cleaning up the contaminated areas. That's all for now. But for more fiery news from the front, tune in to the next episode.